Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be showing you how I put together this Paris-themed miniature dollhouse in a tin. So first we have a look at the box. So it was really well packaged, and then when you flip it over on the back you can see up in the right hand corner, this is the dollhouse that we're going to be putting together today. So once I opened up the box, I pulled out all the parts that were included. So first we had the instructions booklet. Next we have the actual tin where we're going to be making the little dollhouse. And then we have the bag with all the parts that are included. And finally, a stand to display it on. The instructions are in full color and English and include these cutouts in the back for the dollhouse and also this stand that you put together like this. So to start out with, I organized all the included bags of materials, separating them out as they were labeled in the kit, which apparently took me a really long time, and you can't even see because I accidentally put it off screen. So then to start out with, we're going to be working with the battery pack and the lights. So you will attach this string of lights to the battery pack I pulled out. And connecting the wires is super simple. You just want to make sure you connect the white wires to the white wires and then the gray wires to the gray wires to make sure that the connection is properly connected. And then you're going to want to make sure the batteries are the right size, which I did not and struggled with, but then I finally found the right size battery. And when I got those all in, the lights all worked, which was great. So next you want to tape up your wires with the included electrical tape to protect them, which I did incorrectly, so do not do it like this. It's not going to work and it's going to fall off and not fit in the little case. So next we're going to make the cover for the batteries with the switch and these little wooden arms in the other half of the cover. So we're going to glue these little arms, which I accidentally glued upside down in the second part, so I had to fix that later. And the glue I used to glue the switch on didn't even work, and so that fell apart, which we fix later. But first we're going to finish the little cover for the battery by making this little nameplate, and then the thing that the nameplate attaches to that we can put into the tin to cover up the battery where it's still accessible. So this part is going to be the base of the scene as well as the top for the battery cover, so we're just going to glue that together and then start assembling the case for the battery inside the tin. So here I am correcting the mistake I made earlier and making sure those little arms are fit the right way so that it actually fits and covers up the battery correctly. So this is the beginning of the struggle, trying to get the little battery pack to fit inside the tiny area it was supposed to fit in. So I'm just jamming that front piece in and then jamming the floor of the scene into the tin, making sure that the little lights come out the corner so that I can use them and see them, and then trying to get the cover to fit in, which eventually it did. So just checking to make sure the little lights work, and they do, which is great. And then I'm going to glue in the background of the scene, giving us this beautiful background. But then the switch broke, so I had to rip it out and glue it back in. So here I am trying to get the wires out of the way, glued back in, which was a struggle the first time. Then I fit the cover piece and then glue in the floor. And now we can actually move on and begin decorating this thing. So we're going to start with the floor, which we glue in to this little scene, which is going to be the base of our stores. So we're going to do both sides of that. This is going to be our foundation for the piece. And then next we have to glue in these little fiddly lights, which was really difficult because there was 2 little spots inside the stores that you had to do, which I did first in order to have a base for the other lights to have support to glue in. So I used tape and then I glued them. So here you can see they're glued up in the top of the lights as well as the 2 spots inside the stores. So now we can move on to furniture. First was the world's smallest magazine, which barely fit in my gigantic fingers, so you could see me struggling, which was an omen for the things to come with the rest of this little furniture, but I eventually got it and made the tiniest magazine ever. And these shots are so long because it took me forever to get it shaped the correct way, but after that I made this teeny tiny lamp, and then I glued those 2 pieces to this teeny tiny chest of drawers. So the magazine was hard because of course it was, and then I put the lamp on right after that, which completed the first of these tiny furnitures. So next we're making a tiny cabinet with folded pieces of paper to be the door. And these tiny doors wanted to live on my fingers instead of the cabinet, but I eventually got it and made this teeny cabinet. So next we have this little pendant lamp that I made, this tiny bed, this tiny coffee table with cake, and then we finished the first page. So next we're gonna make this teeny tiny cake, and then some ice cream with these fluffy things, and then a gingerbread house with the fluffy things, and then these awful little chairs, then this out of focus little plant, and then another magazine, and then a chair for that magazine to go on. Then I made this teeny tiny easel that broke about 100 times, and then a little table for the coffee shop, and a menu board for that coffee shop. Then we're gonna have a little plant, and making the coffee counter and putting that piece together. And then another potted plant and the chairs for the coffee shop as well. Another plant, another plant. After which we can prep these building pieces as well as construct this teeny tiny balcony. And that finishes that page. So now we're assembling some stairs and some handrails for those little stairs, as well as making these bakery signs and more little plants, which were my favorite thing to make. And then we're gonna make the little roof and this little awning for the bakery, and then making more pieces for the outsides of the shops. So now we can actually start constructing these shops. So I attached the hotel to the back wall piece and then prepped the bakery half of that same piece. And then adding in our little roof and attaching our balcony and putting in the cake stand and then retrofitting the floor that I forgot to put in earlier, and then gluing together the little roof and closing off the edges of the roof so you don't see the seams, and then attaching that to the top of the bakery. And then I put the stairs to the doorway of the hotel and then added the little awning to the bakery. And then we start decorating the hotel with this little rug, the cabinet, the tiny chest of drawers that fell over about 4 times, the little bed, and then the pendant lamp, which was very fiddly, but I didn't record that. Next, we're adding the sign for the bakery, and then this building's almost done. So adding the hotel sign, adding the little cakes in the display area of the bakery, and then attaching the stairs handrails to these little stairs, which, don't worry, was really hard and did break a few times. And then lastly, we're going to add that little tiny mailbox that I did lose, which completed that page. So next we're doing more building prep, including making this little door, these tiny, tiny paintings that I almost lost, more awnings for the coffee shop, and then we can start watching me try to assemble these microscopic buildings. So this building is going to be the coffee shop and study. So the top floor is the study and the bottom floor is the coffee shop. So now we have the walls put in, and then adding this tiny built-in to put the little tiny paintings on, which you can barely see because they were smaller than the top of my finger. But they're there and they're 3D, but luckily you can barely see them once the dollhouse is finally assembled. So then we're going to add this little plant, which is adorable, and then we can close off the study, giving us this cute little room, and then put our little roof on to make sure that no rain gets inside this little building. And now we can close off the porch with this tiny little fence. Now we're going to add this tiny rug to our little study to make it a little bit more cozy, and then add our chair with our little book on top so we can study in our little study. Then we're going to add our easel outside on our balcony and assemble our coffee shop by putting in our counter, and then assembling our coffee shop area with the table and the 2 matching chairs. Giving us this cozy little coffee shop that you can really get a good look at. So now we're going to add the little door, making sure it's cracked open, and then we're going to cover up the edges of the buildings with little pieces of the roof cardboard that we used earlier, and then we're going to attach the awnings, so the welcome one and then the fiddly Cafe du Paris one, which did break a few times. So now we can add the coffee shop into our tin on the right side now that it's done. It fits in there very snugly. I think mine didn't quite fit, but if you jam it in hard enough it will eventually get in there. Next, we're going to add in the hotel and the bakery, which I had a problem with because I angled the roof incorrectly when I glued it down, but eventually I got it in there. So if you're persistent, these pieces will eventually fit. And then we can test out the lights and see how beautiful it looks now that all the pieces are actually in there, and admire all our hard work and try to get the glue off our fingers. Now we can start putting in the outdoor furniture. So we can start with this little plant by the hotel, then putting the bakery outdoor seating together with the little table, this little tiny sign that I eventually got in there, and then these 2 awful chairs, these chairs being awful because they broke a bunch of times when I was making them. Next, we're going to add this little plant next to the coffee shop, and then the other plant with the menu on it, and then the crawling vine on the right side of the coffee shop. So next we're going to prep all the greenery, and thankfully I got a good time lapse of me prepping the greenery where we can see my frizzy hair, but then I accidentally forgot to turn the time lapse on for actually decorating a thing, so here I am realizing I messed that up. And then here's the time lapse of me finishing up the remaining decorations with the greenery. So you can kind of see the process of me assembling the greenery, which ended up being my favorite part. So now we have the piece fully decorated with all the greenery, and we can do the actual last step, which is assembling these paper decorations for the top half of the tin. So we glue in the little story, this cute little picture, this ticket to happiness, and then assembling this little envelope and gluing that into place. And now we're done. And we can add our little cat friends. So we'll put the little guy, he'll chill by the hotel, and then she'll chill in the street. And now we're done. I can't believe after all that work we finished. So here's a little overview of all the hard work I did. You can see how little and cute it is. I hope you enjoyed my struggle. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.